No words of thanks are enough for something like this. An experience that is the greatest one can offer a scholar, an actual, thorough, generous discussion of the book, which is what I experience now, which has enlightened me way beyond what I could have imagined about the stakes of the book. I want to thank, first of all, Gal and Galili for this initiative, for inviting me and these extraordinary speakers. I am moved and I'm inspired, and I know that I have to hold myself back from going into each and every point and start to discuss and argue and elaborate on and rectify. I will just have to choose a few. I would like to start with the poster, and I will then go into some of the points that each one of you have mentioned, and try, if I can, to bring this together. When Gal sent me the poster, I was at the same time shocked and delighted. And I realized that my positive response was the much more interesting one. Why shocked? Well, I will briefly show you the cover of my book, and I will try to begin my comments in a comparison between the cover of my book and the poster. So, you see, it's very light here, but it's light blue. And in the middle, there is the artwork of an American artist called Rebecca Quaitman, who had a fantastic exhibition here in Tel Aviv at the Museum of Modern Art, an exhibition entirely devoted to her artwork relating to Klay's Angelus Novus and Benjamin's Angel of History. And this was one of the artworks that I saw there. And when I saw this, I knew that this would have to be the cover of my book, and I'm very grateful to Rebecca Quaitman that she allowed me to use it as a cover. In the meantime, I don't, the painting is now at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, and at the end I will tell you why and what the meaning of it is. But I would like to start with a comparison between the poster and the cover of the book. Why was I shocked? You can see that this here is way more dramatic, has way more impact, and maybe even attracts the attention to something that is going on right there at the center that is, let's say, either extraterrestrial, beyond the human, inhuman, mystical, some kind of revelation, some kind of light that is not like in Kafka's stories, just like a glimmer, but shining us straight in the face. By contrast, there is, maybe I shouldn't say contrast, there is something of this in the painting. But mainly, the painting speaks of absence. It is the absent angel. But at the place of the angel, the place where the angel left, there is nothing. There is an emptiness. Now, the distinction between these two leads me to two sets of of reflections. The one relates to the problem of modernity, the death of God, and what replaces it, how one relates to it, and leads me first to Galili's wonderful comments that ended on the daunting, well, the angel is gone, let him go. You know, however humorously this was put, it certainly contrasted with Menachem's question, well, what exactly does one do with that which disappeared with the death of God, and suggested a search for a theology for today. The first contrast between that kind of mystical drama of a light shining from elsewhere and the absence of that angel, the disappearance, is supplanted with another contrast that is crucial in my book and that has come up in some of your comments. And especially in Menachem's, when he singled out the passage that he liked personally about the experience of near death, Sinai coming back and affirming everyday life. And altogether, I was very touched by the fact that this is something that spoke to you, because it was also for me a fundamental moment. For me, the difference between the poster and the cover of the book lies there too. On the poster of the book, there is no drama of that kind. There is no mystical moment, but there is there is an absence and even a window through which the angel could possibly have escaped. In my book, that element is fundamental, the element of the everyday, the element of common life, and I can try to explain why and how. Also why this does not necessarily lead me to the title of the poster, which I let stand there because I like the challenge of it. In search of new angels, let the angel go. I think that my book mainly talks about the disappearance and the loss of this angel, and does not necessarily go in search for new ones. It is rather the understanding that when modernity set in and made that dimension disappear, what one can replace it with must not necessarily be a new angel or new angels altogether. But instead, there is something that the tradition leaves over to us, and the Jewish tradition in particular, that can be dealt with in different ways. I'm turning in my book explicitly away from aspects of Kabbalah, aspects of theology, and I'm turning to something that I find more fruitful, although it is only present here and there in the thinkers, but I am trying to draw that out, which is something that is closer to the Talmudic tradition in Judaism, which I don't think is primarily concerned with the theology or with the kind of questions asked by the Kabbalah, but is concerned with questions of justice, questions of law, questions that can indeed be brought into the everyday life. The passage in which this comes out, maybe the most explicit in my book, is the passage that has been quoted, that relates, and you quoted one part of it in the context of Kafka's Abraham. Abraham is standing on his building site and is called to sacrifice his son. And you read that passage where Abraham, where the text says, he's standing in the middle of his world building, in the middle of his care for his house, care for this world here, and now he should go, and Abraham says, I'm very sorry, but I'd love to do this, you know, I want to be a good servant, but it just so happens that I have to take care of my house. And the very last sentence, Michael, that you didn't quote, but that captures this. The last sentence of that imagination of another Abraham by Kafka, he says, these men, and now it's not just Abraham, but men like this Abraham, they stand in their building site, building deliberately houses that cannot be finished, so as not to have to lift their eyes and see the mount in the distance. Now, we have this whole question captured in these few sentences. This Abraham does not negate, and the mount in the distance is the mount where Abraham is supposed to sacrifice his son. It is also the Mount Sinai, the Mount of Revelation, and it is in some ways stands for the theological altogether. And this Abraham doesn't say that this mountain isn't there. Even on the contrary, it is there in the distance, but he's building infinite houses that cannot be finished. And here we have both the infinite task and the deferral, because that is described. There's always one more thing that remains to be done, that remains to be done here in this world, so as not to have to go to the kind of theology, the kind of God that is embodied by that mount there. And that is a kind of theology that deals primarily with revelation on the one hand and with sacrifice on the other. But it is nevertheless in the face of what is there in the distance that this Abraham deals with what he's dealing with. Maybe this has given an answer to my reluctant dealing with theological matters. You're absolutely right. It is not, maybe even, it is maybe even more than that. You are right in asking, and Galili suggested this as well. What exactly what do I want with this book? In the positive sense, it is very clear what I'm going against. It is very clear that I have a critique of these thinkers who now turn to, Paulinian solution for the questions that were asked by these thinkers, and that I'm not spelling out what I do see as an alternative. I think that in the wonderful session, Gal, thank you so much for inviting me. It really was wonderful that we had before. I think I could formulate explicitly what I think the value of these thinkers is, why I chose these over others. More explicitly, that is true than in the book. I don't think that I'm not saying what I positively think is the most valuable among these thinkers. But, and here I'm turning to Michal for having, first of all, enlightened me about aspects in my book that I had not noticed. And you have done a kind of reading of the book, bringing passages together that were really a revelation to me when I listened to you. Also, the whole dimension of the epistolary and its meaning. I was in wonder. But yes, it's true that all this is there, and I almost feel like rereading this and seeing how how this has happened and whether there is underneath it really something that escapes me and that is there in the book. Also the very fact that these are dialogues and conversations between, very often between two in this, in an intimacy that is not necessarily harmonious, but yeah, that is dealing with these essentials in parts, yes, in fragments, but in some ways, Michal, what you said and the way, especially in the middle of your presentation, what you brought out, in a way answers your question. It answers it because you make the distinction between the micro and the macro level of my book. And at the micro level, you said that there is, a very close coming to insights that in the big picture I am almost withholding. Maybe what Michal describes as my approach is something that undoes the very dichotomy of the micro and the macro, because it is a mode of thinking that brings in these macro questions into the micro texture of these conversations. And speaking of conversation, yes, I think that what you all brought out is that there is indeed in this book a conversation that is going on in me, that a conversation between the two very different approaches that you brought out, and that Gal and Galili introduced by saying that this is in parts and that it is not one whole, but that there is a conversation that is going on in me about indeed how to deal with the tension of modernity and tradition, how to deal with the tension of philosophy and literature, how to deal with certain theological, political issues that are unresolved, and that conversation itself, I felt that it came out in the two approaches that you had to the book itself. I want to take up maybe one element from each of your reflections to go into somewhat more. The element of exile that you talked about, the exile as deferral. I think that I'm primarily concerned, when I talk about exile, of a dichotomy in talking about it, that on the one hand is sheer lament, and on the other, and sheer lament about, that has a nationalistic underpinning, that, one needs a soil and one needs a land, and on the other hand, the sheer idealization of a metaphoric state of exile. And I think that what I'm primarily concerned with is not so much the deferral as it is the possibility to think the two together, to turn away from a kind of nationalistic necessity of soil, and at the same time keep what one gains from the insight of the experience of exile, that is pain, that is suffering, that leads together only to a kind of alternative politics. So there was just, trying to reply to a specific element. Michal, the two quotes with which you ended are probably the closest to what I sense matters in my book. I feel that there is a form of attention that you but that all of you have paid to texts that are not your own, that you bring your life to, your concerns, your ideas to, and engage deeply with another, and that kind of engagement and that kind of conversation is the best we have, the best we can do, and that is that which can lead beyond our present. Now, what that present is in my book, and I will briefly return to the poster and to the cover of my book, and I will end on that. The angel of history that is disappearing stands for me for those values of the German Jewish thinkers that I deal with in my book, values that are related to holding together things that are today being torn apart. It is the primary argument of my book that holds together its many facets. Those of you who have not recognized where there's an angel here, this is where the angel comes from. And in Rebecca Quaitman's painting, the angel has indeed disappeared. Now, this disappearance in my book stands for those who are tearing apart the precious moment in German Jewish thinkers of going on the one hand to a kind of radical particularism, and on the other hand to universalism of a new kind that Menachem, you have described indeed as the new supersessionism, and alluding here more specifically to these three thinkers that I'm dealing with in the book, Alain Badiou, Slavoj Žižek, and Giorgio Agamben, very different each one. So in the book I'm dealing with them very specifically in each case. But what they have in common is indeed this supersessionism. The idea that once Christianity has appeared, Judaism has become irrelevant, and that there is something of that one finds again today. And my book ends on, and maybe this is where the new angels indeed come in, and the question whether we are in search of new angels. Because at the end of my book, the new angels are meant in a rather ironic way. The quote comes from so it in my own research, I came across the possibility of new angels coming out of this painting in the interpretation by Ariella Zulay, who notices that the angel in Benjamin is squinting and that one eye is looking out of the frame, and that makes possible the possibility of thinking new angels. And from there I go then to those who read most recently Benjamin's angel in different terms. And I have just to give you one of these quotes here. Just ultimately my twist is, this is Slavoj Žižek about Benjamin's angel, that this famous Benjaminian angel, to which the title of the movie, that's the movie by Udi Aloni. My twist is that this famous Benjaminian angel to which the title of the movie refers is Christ himself. I'm just using this one because it's the shortcut. But there are others here. You have Alain Badiou, Between Four Figures of Messianism. This is where the solution is happening. Walter Benjamin, Gershom Scholem, Shabtai Tzvi, and St. Paul. Why did that? So Badiou wrote a book called The Invention of Universalism by St. Paul, and the question of why Paul of all, and how this relates to Paul's rescinding of Jewish law, of Paul's turning away from or rather calling for the supersession of Judaism altogether, is a story unto itself and how it relates to contemporary politics. I just want to end on another image that some have either heard from or seen, that explains the meaning of the painting in yet a completely new way. Well, I said before that the painting is no longer in Tel Aviv, it is now in Jerusalem, and that is because Rebecca Quaitman discovered on, where do you see it best? Well, she discovered on the left corner, left lower corner, you can't see it here, it's too dark, two initials. And she became curious. The initials LC. And she became curious and wanted to know more and was surprised and asked. She wrote to me, we got to know each other via friends. She wrote to me and asked me if I had ever noticed this. No, I hadn't. If I knew anything about it. No, I hadn't. And she then pursued this and asked, so first she used X-rays to figure out what was maybe behind the Angelus Novus, so Klee's Angelus Novus. And she couldn't get through with the X-rays and asked the Israel Museum if they could help her with a more sophisticated tool. And they indeed could, and discovered what is behind Klee's Angelus Novus. And this is what she discovered. This is L.C. Lucas Cranach's famous depiction of Luther. So what happened there, and this was unknown until her discovery, is that there was this poster by, so a print at the time, of Luther. There was printer's ink, a layer of printer's ink that Klee applied to it. That's why she couldn't get through with the X-ray. And on top of it, Klee painted the Angelus Novus, and Walter Benjamin, on top of that, wrote his famous piece, The Angel of History. And there are commentator after commentator putting their layers on it, in a way superseding one, the other, and the other, and the other, and coming to my own comment of this, to the cover of my book, to us being here and seeing that, so that maybe rather than superseding, we have this palimpsest of layers that counts not only for this, but for the legacy that I've been talking about, for the legacy that these thinkers, these German Jewish thinkers have taken up of the Jewish tradition as a whole, and that we continue to live and think with in conversation, in dialogue, in letters, Michal, precious ones among friends, among colleagues who care about things that mattered in the past, that matter for us today. And I want to thank you so much for this opportunity that I had to discuss this with you today here. Thank you.